Some units or groups of units coming into Warhammer 3 with Immortal Empires have had some changes. Here's what I've spotted so far. The first pretty hefty change comes for the Lizardmen, and specifically their Saurus warriors of many types, because they will no longer suffer from Rampage. That's right, you'll always have control of your Saurus from now on. This is the ability cards for Primal Instincts, the old version on the left, the new version on the right. Does a very similar thing, and you can see it's lost Rampage but gained a physical resistance plus 5%, which is nice. But possibly more substantial than both of those things changing is that it now activates when the Saurus drop below 50% health rather than 20%. So you now don't have to wait until your Saurus are nearly dead before they'll become more powerful. So this should really help the Lizardmen stand up to all these new demons that they're going to have to deal with. As they don't rout, they're going to need a little more staying power against some of the tougher stuff like Blood Letters here. So it's a very substantial change for the Lizardmen and a core frontline unit of theirs in the Saurus Warriors. Not only do you not have to worry about losing control of them anymore, but you'll get that damage boost much earlier. And when I say this applies to Saurus Warriors, I mean all kinds of Saurus Warriors. Even the Cavalry, the Cold One Riders, the Cold One Spear Riders, the Horned Ones, they're all ridden by Saurus who have Primal Instincts, and they now will not suffer from Rampage either. So you'll have more control over your Cavalry too. Should overall make the Lizardmen much stronger. Next, another fairly significant change, this time for the good old Empire, because Karl Franz and the boys have now got some niftier, speedier horses, at least for their heavy cav. Empire Knights and Reichsguard have gone from 66 speed up to 78, so a fairly substantial gain, and Knights of the Blazing Sun have gone from 71 speed up to 78 as well. So all of the heavy horse cavalry has gotten faster. The demigryphs are still the same, and the light horse cavalry like Pistoliers is still the same, which also means that yes, the war wagons have also got faster too. They've gone from a mere 50 speed up to 66, so the same speed as the old Empire Knights and Reichsguard. So perhaps they can make themselves a little more useful now, and people will stop hating on the poor old war wagons. Now, what does this really mean for the Empire? Well, faster horses means faster flanking, of course. And as cavalry flanking is a huge part of the Empire's game, this should be a really nice change for them to allow them to have just a bit more mobility. It's not a huge increase in speed, but it is fairly substantial as it is a big part of the Empire's game. If you bring a lot of Empire Knights in an army, you'll just be able to set them up a bit quicker, get them in those flanking positions. You'll be able to respond a bit quicker. If there's a certain enemy you need them to go and deal with, they'll be able to pull away from their cycle charging a bit quicker. So overall, it should just make the Empire Cavalry more effective, and that should make the Empire more effective. As I say, all the other cavalries have stayed the same, the Pistoliers, the demigryphs, at least speed-wise, and hopefully the war wagons will be better now, overall making the Empire a little more effective and powerful with their cav. Next, some fairly big changes with Ethereal Units as a whole. So that's going to affect every faction with them, including the Vampire Coast, the Vampire Counts, the Tomb Kings a little bit, the Wood Elves, and of course the Dwarves, and I'm sure there's probably others as well. So what's changed? Well, in Warhammer 2, Ethereal Units had a 75% physical resistance, which meant they would fairly reduce the amount of damage done to them by anything attacking them unless they had magical attacks, in which case they would do a full 100% damage to them and they would die very quickly because they had very low health. That was the trade-off. You get a 75% physical resistance, you can stop most damage, but you have a very small health pool. Well, now they've got a bigger health pool, but their physical resistance has gone down to 55%. Still fairly substantial, but a fair bit less than before. What this should mean is that Ethereal Units are still going to be pretty good at taking on anything that doesn't have magical attacks, and they'll still be able to waste a lot of their opponent's damage. But if they should come into contact with an enemy with magical attacks, they won't get absolutely ruined quickly like they do in Warhammer 2. This change has likely come about because of all the demons in Warhammer 3 that all have magical attacks. So if they stayed the same as they were before, it would probably be very difficult to get much use out of any kind of Ethereal unit a lot of the time, especially against those demon factions. But overall, you're still going to play Ethereal units pretty much the same, trying to avoid those magical attack units. Another nice little bonus Ethereal units have gained is that they now have Frostbite on their melee attack, so all Ethereal units will slow whatever they're attacking by 30%. Next, some Dragony changes. When going through the Norscan roster, I noticed that the Frostworm had 1,000 more health than it did before, and seemingly more mass. And I think maybe its breath attack got a little bit stronger, but I'm not 100% on that. Either way, it looked like the Frostworm, who is often regarded as probably the worst dragon in Warhammer 2, had finally got some buffs. Nice. But then I checked all the other dragons and I noticed they had pretty much the same thing going on. The Forest Dragon for the Wood Elves had been buffed up in the same way, and the High Elf dragons as well. All of them seem to have got this same treatment, making dragons hopefully stronger in Warhammer 3. Not only from simply having more health, but the increase to mass is quite significant. One of the smaller dragons, the Sun Dragon for the High Elves, had 1800 mass in Warhammer 2. Now it has 3500. The Star Dragon, one of the biggest, baddest dragons around in Warhammer 2, had a mass of 2500 before, and now it has 4400. So pretty substantial gains on the mass of all dragons. This should mostly affect them in two ways. Number one, when they fly down into infantry, they are going to knock them around a bit more and send them flying. This should give the dragon a little more room to move before those units that have gone flying have come back to their unit formation. But most usefully, this is going to help dragons get out of combat, which is something they tend to struggle with before. Sometimes a big, massive dragon could be stopped and held back by like one or two men that happen to be stood in front of it, and of course that always seemed a bit silly. So hopefully these changes to dragons, giving them a bit more health and giving them way more mass, should make them much better overall, because they often had lackluster performance in Warhammer 2. So hopefully dragons in Warhammer 3 are going to be much more dangerous. Lastly, to the Vampire Counts roster, which has had a lot of changes, not quite a rework, but definitely some buffing up. I'm just going to rattle off these changes quick fire style. Old Manfred von Carstein has lost some spells. He used to have 2 full spell lore books, the Lore of Death and the Lore of Vampires, so 12 spells overall, which is really too much for any lord, to be honest. You're never going to need to have 12 spells on you at any one time. So now he has a mixed spell book of both of those lores, and it's pretty much the best 3 spells from each, which are Doom and Darkness, Spirit Leech, Fate of Yuna, Invocation of Nehek, Raise Dead, and Wind of Death. So a really nice selection, although there is a pretty big change to Invocation of Nehek, which means it no longer heals a group and only heals a single target. A nice buff that's come along for some of the cheaper Vampire Counts infantry, including zombies, skeletons, and crypt ghouls, is that they've gained some leadership, around 10 to 15 for all of these units, so they should stick around a bit longer before they start to crumble, giving the Vampire Counts a little bit more sticky staying power. And the Black Knights are another unit that have had a buff, and pretty substantially. They've gone from 24 melee attack to 30, 30 melee defense to 36, 36 weapon strength to 42, 26 charge bonus to 31, and they've gained magical attacks, which should help them with all the demons. So pretty big buffs to these Black Knights. Same with the Lance and Barding, they've had some buffs. Blood Knights have had a few little stat changes as well. So all the cavalry seemingly getting buffed up for the Vampire Counts. Another unit that was a bit underwhelming before has had a little bit of a buff up as well, the Crypt Horrors. They've gained some leadership, nice bit of melee attack, nice bit of melee defense, some charge bonus as well, so they should be much more effective now and be a better monstrous infantry, able to hopefully make themselves just a little more useful. And hopefully we can say the same for the Black Coach, because it's another unit that's had fairly significant buffs. It's gained 5 melee attack, 15 melee defense, it only had 10 before, now it has 25, and a pretty big buff to its weapon strength going from 120 to 200. So it's significantly buffed in a lot of its important areas, so should be capable of much more damage now and should survive a bit better with that extra melee defense. So that's some of the more notable units that have had bigger changes. Pretty much every unit has maybe had a little bit of a change though, mostly extra leadership for anything that was lower leadership before, even things like Fellbats, a little bit of extra melee attack for units as well, a little melee defense maybe. So overall the Vampire roster has just been beefed up, just that little bit everywhere and a few little units more substantially. Overall though, this should make the Vampire Counts pretty powerful. We're going to have to see how they do against the Warhammer 3 factions, of course. But to be honest, Warhammer 2 Vampire Counts wasn't that bad. They weren't exactly one of the weakest factions in the game by any means, even though they are one of the oldest and least reworked factions of the game. They still held their own pretty well and were a strong faction. Now with the slight changes to healing though, it's going to be a little bit different for the Vampire Counts, but still, the core of their gameplay should be the same. Something for Vampire Counts players to look forward to, I'm sure. There's also some pretty hefty changes to the campaign for Vampire Counts, which you can check out in this video here, along with some changes to Norska as well. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the future.